My name is Alon Liel. I was an Israeli diplomat for 3 decades, serving as ambassador to several places and as Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the years 2000-2001. And I'm the initiator of a petition of 1,000 Israelis to the European parliaments, calling upon them to recognize Palestine. And in the last 4 months, 9 European parliaments called for the recognition of Palestine. And I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to tell you this story. I'll start by saying that I belong to a group of Israelis who still believe that there is a possibility to change circumstances on the ground. I think many of us understand what most of the Israeli public is understanding, and probably most of the Palestinians are understanding, that the word peace is becoming irrelevant, and even that the word agreement is to a certain extent irrelevant. We're thinking in terms of a kind of an arrangement that is not necessarily agreed and definitely not solving the whole problem, but it's a kind of a tailor-made solution that we worked out based on the ingredients that we have around, based on the situation of the players, starting from Israel and Palestine, going through Europe, the United States, and the interaction between the players. We have a very strong Israel, militarily, economically, technologically. We have a very weak Palestine, torn apart politically, very disillusioned. We have a worried Europe as a result of Islamic terrorism, economic problems, and we have a paralyzed United States that has a very clear idea of what should be done, but is very reluctant to meaningfully intervene in order to enhance a solution. So, taking all these ingredients, we thought for a while what could be done, and 4 or 5 months ago we jumped on an opportunity. Sweden announced, a new Swedish Prime Minister announced that Sweden is going to recognize Palestine. We thought it is amazing. It is very courageous. The Israeli government jumped on them for a while, called the ambassador back, and we thought that Sweden is standing alone in Europe, and we felt it needs help. About 4 months ago, I visited Oxford, and I met a lord called John Alderdice, who told me that the British Parliament is going to vote on the issue of recognizing Palestine. And I immediately jumped on it and said, this could be an historic vote, because the Swedes have declared that they are going to recognize Palestine, and we have the feeling that it will be very difficult for them to go ahead if they'll be alone. If the British Parliament will recognize Palestine, this will give them some backing, and I think will trigger a momentum in Europe of a recognition of Palestine. And he listened to me, and he said, let me check with my party members, the Liberal Democrats, what the situation is, if it has a chance or not. And I told him, Lord Alderdice, please, if it has a chance, I think I can organize a letter, a petition, from maybe 50 maybe 100 Israelis that will call upon the British Parliament to recognize Palestine, not only in favor of Palestine, in favor of us, of saving our democracy, our Jewish identity. And said, let me check. And a week later, I got an email. The vote stands a chance. We need your letter. And within 36 hours, 363 Israelis, most of them intellectuals, some of them big names in Europe, signed such a letter. And the vote took place, and it was 274 against 12 for the recognition of Palestine. To our great surprise, we saw that the letter was very effective. Some of the members of parliament read it during the debate, and those who submitted the motion used it all over with the parliamentarians. And we were shocked by this result, overwhelming result, when the government in Britain was against it. And then we thought it should spill over to other parliaments, and we announced that every parliament in Europe that will discuss the issue of recognition of Palestine will get our letter. In the meantime, we added signatures. Over 1,000 Israelis signed it, including the famous authors Amos Oz, Aleph Bet Yoshua, David Grossman, and others. And this letter started traveling from one parliament to the other. And not only that we sent the letter, we were in touch with the parties that submitted the motions and lobbying inside. Israelis lobbying all over Europe in different parliaments for the recognition of Palestine, coordinating what we are doing with the Palestinians. The result was that between October and December 2014, 8 parliaments voted and called upon their governments to recognize Palestine, among them France, the 2 houses, Ireland, 2 houses, Spain, Portugal, Luxembourg, and the European Parliament also. It brought us to the middle of December with an unbelievable type of momentum, in a rhythm of a parliament voting once a week, reviving hopes among the Palestinians and also among us Israeli leftists who thought this could really trigger something very interesting. And then Europe went for its vacation. Europe is disappearing for 5 weeks. End of December, the Palestinians decided to submit a draft resolution to the UN Security Council, a Jordanian draft resolution. We were in constant touch with them. They were very confident they have the 9 votes they need in order to trigger a discussion and maybe an American veto. We were not sure about it at all. We were not involved at all. We spoke with them. We warned them that they might not have the 9, but they decided to submit, and they failed. They failed. They got 8 out of the 9 they needed, and this was a blow also to the European momentum. Although the European momentum helped already because France and Luxembourg, where the parliaments already called for recognition, voted for the Jordanian. But it was not enough. It was not enough. Nigeria abstained. They didn't get the 9. It was a setback. In the middle of this pause, when Europe is asleep politically, and then came this Paris tragedy, these horrible terror attacks in Paris, with the impact on the whole continent. And when we came back to this recognition agenda toward the end of January, we were on different background. The hesitations were enormous. The Paris attacks and then other attacks in Europe, like Copenhagen and so on, created a different mood. The European public connected between this fanatic, terrible terrorist attacks and the Palestinians somehow, things that are, of course, not related at all. And parliaments that were about to vote, like the Italian parliament, started postponing it. There was a vote still in Belgium, and a ninth parliament was added, but we felt it's becoming very difficult, and we have a crisis in this initiative. Very, very difficult to trigger again this momentum. There were other things that played a role, like Israeli diplomacy, who was very much against it. Also, in a certain extent, American diplomacy. And add to it the setback in the Security Council, terrorism in Europe, and the Palestinians suffered as a result. And here we stand with a very interesting momentum that lasted for 4 months, brought us to the recognition in 9 parliaments and in one government, the Swedish government. And if this does not continue, we did nothing. I have a lot of Turkish experience in my background. I served there as a diplomat, as the head of our mission. And I know from my experience about the Armenian genocide issue that for years this issue traveled from one parliament to the other. A lot of parliaments, including in Europe, recognized the events of 1915, 1916 as genocide, but it stopped there. There was no moving into government decisions, and here we stand with this need to revive this momentum. I hope that the Italians will do it soon, and we can recover, and it can travel to Finland and Slovenia and the Swiss parliament that are having these beginnings, and then to governments. I have the feeling that this is, at this junction, the responsibility of Europe. It's strange, but Europe and the EU, with 28 countries, was very reluctant to get involved in the conflict on the political level. Europe said, we'll give money to Gaza, we'll give money to the West Bank, but the fact that it started rolling 4 or 5 months ago on the political level of recognition surprised us. And the mood prior to it was, we are the cheerleaders of the Americans. This is the prerogative of the Americans. We're not going to intervene. But when Europe took this responsibility, we were thrilled. But now it has to come back to the agenda. Otherwise, we did nothing. And I hope that conferences like you're having, and maybe even a bigger conference of representatives of parties all over Europe that submitted the motions for recognition of Palestine and are about to submit the motions, will have an all-European conference for the recognition of Palestine with Palestinians, with us, Israelis. We can bring very prominent Israelis to attend it, very well-known intellectuals, well-known in Europe too, and to have such an Israeli-Palestinian-European conference for the recognition of Palestine. It's important that it travels in Europe, goes on traveling from one parliament and one government to the other, but the end result of it has to be the Security Council. And we have the feeling that if we will complete this journey, maybe even until the German parliament, I don't know if the German parliament will recognize Palestine, or at least discuss it, And that if we'll build a European consensus, coming from the public, not from the government, it's very much a public initiative, and we'll build such a consensus, the 4 European members in the Security Council will vote in favor, and then we can get the 9. Then we can get the 9. This time, in December, 2 of the Europeans, including Britain, abstained, and Palestine could not get the 9. If we have the 9, then the Americans face the dilemma if to veto it or not. They might veto it once, they might veto it twice, but I don't think they can veto such a thing forever, and I'm not sure at all they will even veto it once with the relations they're having now with our Prime Minister, and let's see what will happen in our elections. I remember when I was the Director General of the Ministry in the first year of the Second Intifada, it was 2000, 2001, I had a call from the ambassadors. They used this veto several times, and they said, we cannot go on using the veto forever. You are ruining our relations with the whole Middle East. There is a limit to the price we are ready to pay in order to defend Israel. So I think that if Europe will be united about it, if Europe will be decisive about the need to recognize Palestine, this will spill over to the UN, spill over to the United States, and then it's a different ballgame. It's a different ballgame because if there is even the danger of Palestine becoming a member state in the UN, or if it will really happen, then an unbelievable thing happened. Palestine is a member state in the UN without even negotiating with Israel. They bypassed all the issue of negotiation. This is a nightmare for Israel because the occupation at the moment is 47 years old, but is still called temporary. But if we occupy a member state of the UN, we are in an entirely different international situation. If such a thing happens, procedures will start to expel Israel from the UN. This is something no Israeli leader, no Israeli government, and definitely not the Israeli public can allow. So this kind of rolling momentum can bring about a very meaningful change in the attitude of the Israelis to the conflict. At the moment, the tragedy is, and I started by saying that many of us do not believe in an agreement. We don't believe in an agreement because we are here and they are there. Israeli public said, when this is the gap in the balance of power, why should we even have another look at them? Who are they? What can they do to us? This is the feeling, this toward the Palestinians. But if they are recognized as a member state, they were already recognized as a state, but if they are a member state and the Israeli public understands that Europe is not going to give up, and the United States is not going to give up, and the world is not going to give up, this is kind of leveling the playground and brings the Palestinians to the point, although they will not be stronger militarily as a result and economically as a result, but it brings them to the point that we have to relate to them. And in a conflict situation, and I teach in the Department of Conflict Resolution in Tel Aviv University, in conflicts there is a term that came from the Irish conflict called parity of esteem. I never heard about it before. First time I heard about it was about 4 or 5 years ago. But the moment you absorb the meaning of it, you understand that this is our problem. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there is no parity of esteem. Israel, strong Israel, is looking down on the Palestinians, and the Palestinians, in a way, are looking up to it and saying, well, these giants, they will not allow us to have a reasonable state of our own, and this leads to a lot of despair. This type of elegant European momentum of recognition of Palestine. And I'm saying elegant because it's a positive thing. It's not, you're not applying sanctions against Israel that can damage the Israeli economy, and not even against the settlements in this case, which I, by the way, support, but in a very positive way of recognition of Palestine, something that in fact is on the Israeli agenda. Including Netanyahu said, we are supporting two states. So if you're supporting two states, what's wrong with recognizing Palestine? So in something that should not really provoke a big crisis between states in Europe and Israel, and between the EU as a whole and Israel, you are giving the Palestinians the backing that is giving them the pride and making use of the advantage they are having of the international support. It's cashing on this sympathy toward the Palestinians. It's closing the gap, and from a narrower gap, then you can see it and start relating to each other. Tony Blair was in Gaza recently and published an article in which he said that at this stage, even if you take the representatives of the sides with a talented mediator and you put them in one room for eternity, you will not reach an agreement. And this is Tony Blair, who is an optimist usually, and I don't agree with the solution he finds to it. He goes a lot to the economic aspect. I go to the political. I think, unfortunately, this is the situation. Gap between Israel and the Palestinians has grown tremendously. The only way to bridge it is to explain the Israeli public that in the international arena, the Palestinians can accumulate the support that can embarrass Israel in legal institutions, but mostly in the Security Council. And Israelis should have another serious look at the issue of the conflict and think again about this indifference and about this attitude, ignoring the conflict and thinking it will one day just fade away. So that's the story. Thank you for hosting me.